Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our data meeting today. Sorry about the slight delay in me getting in here, is having some technical issues on my side, but we're here. Welcome, everyone. Nicole, if you could advance to the next page. Obviously, please mute your mics, and if you have questions, raise your hands as we move forward. Here's our agenda item. We'll be talking about the CRDC data collection updates, address validations, the SOAP enrollment, October 1 submission feedback, the summer EBT data collection, SOAR reporting updates, special education updates, graduation rates for cohort 2024, and important dates for December 1 UTREC submission. So that's the schedule today. And with that, is Amanda here and ready?
I'm here.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, you guys can go to the next slide. Okay, so the Civil Rights Data Collection, CRDC, is coming up for the 23-24 school year. It's tentatively scheduled to open on December 9th and close on March 7th of 2025. Right now, we are not sure whether the state is going to be able to pre-populate or not. We'll have more updates on that for the next LEA meeting next month. And that is all I have, unless there are questions.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about our address validations, giving another update of where we're at. We've been doing this for month after month, and we just want to make sure everybody is understanding our progress and whenever things are changing to where nobody's nervous on that. Go to the next slide. All right, so for our December finalization, which is going to be that December 2nd to December 6th, and I've got a link there on this for you for the reference for the December finalizer guide. The same as last month. So I'm just re-showing the same thing that we had here for the last month. So if you're already familiar with it, you don't need to follow along and look for any changes. But if you missed the last month, then I'm still going to show this here for you. That the level 2 non-loading or fatal errors, there's the 2 district of residence validation warnings are considered non-loading, the invalid address, which we've again got shown here. And these are actually not going to be holding you up for this year. So this is what we've hoped for, trying to get to fatal, sort of get to the non-loading, but we're not going to be preventing you from being able to do finalizations due to these areas. The 3 geospatial fields, the GPS, latitude, longitude, geocode, those are available. They're optional, so if you don't have that information, you don't have to have that for every student. It's an alternative means for being able to satisfy an address validation, which then is used for coming up with that district of residence. And both of those 2 errors are level 2 errors, which means that it's not just for your LEA, but it's when we take a look at it from outside of just the collected data that you have, if it's validating correctly across other LEAs or with external sources, like what we do with the Utah GRC for address validation. And we've got the lookup that's going to be maintained still through the physical address line 1. So if you don't have that available yet with your SIS to be able to use the GPS, longitude, latitude, or geocode, you can still provide that information instead in the physical address line 1, and we'll still be looking for it there and being able to pull that. These are just going to be going through as warnings. So just to make sure that that's clear, go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so here's the challenge which we have to get to the goal that we have for this to be good, usable data for the state, and able to take these to the point of going non-loading. So we've still got about 4,037 instances where we're not getting that valid address correctly. And that's across 77 different LEAs. So there's a lot of individual needs out there. And if you have desire to get some assistance on those, please reach out. We're still wanting to get these addressed as soon as possible. You won't have these on place for becoming non-loading within at least the next, couple months. We'll make sure that we bring it to attention here in the LEA meetings before we turn that on to being a non-loading error. As again, we don't want to interrupt any of the other services which depend on those students getting in consistently on a daily basis. So as it says, we're still analyzing the collection results from that new data being sent and looking for additional ways to try to help you. But let us know if you have any students where you're using what you believe to be a valid GPS coordinates or geocode, and it's not resolving and you're getting a warning message. If there are any of those cases, you can go ahead and submit a help desk ticket, and we're happy to be able to go in with those use cases with you and try to help you find a resolution. All right, any questions on that? Any mishaps anybody's had? We went through the October finalizer period where, again, the same behavior you should be expecting for that. If anybody had any concerns during the October finalizer and you didn't feel like you had a chance to be able to voice those concerns, feel free to drop something in the chat or again, reach out to myself or open a ticket and we'll try to help get that addressed for you. All right, that's all I had. Go ahead to the next slide and next person.
Hey, Cliff, there was
Yeah.
one in the chat, not a question, just.
Okay. So even in the future during the school year, it would be great if they could stay warnings until the end of year submission. I think that could end up being what happens. It really is a goal, a soft goal that we have to try to get through those remaining error warnings that we have showing, get everybody to a point where we feel everyone feels confident with it. And then at that point, we would then try to approach you and say, here's the results we have. We feel confident. Please voice your concerns. If there's a problem, then we can try to get that engaged and make that switch. But otherwise, we would be looking at end of the year as we do expect to have it in place by then for sure. So if we don't do it early, it'll be then. Go ahead, Riley.
I just have a question, Stacy, to clarify. Do you mean that like next year, the following year, every single year, like the request is to have them like not trigger until year end or? Yes,
So I'll be
okay.
clear, the warnings are fine. We love getting the warnings so that we know what we need to fix, but it's not fair to a student to have that go fatal because their parents entered the wrong address and now they can't test. And so if they just stay warnings and then as we roll over, I mean, sorry, not as we roll over, but as we end the year, just like we do with a lot of our warnings, they'll just go fatal at the end of the year.
I think that's great feedback, and we can take that away and consider if that is something that we can accommodate year over year. I do believe that could end up happening out of coincidence in this case. Go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure the district of residence data has to be accurate for the October funding formulas. And so waiting until year end to make sure that the data is accurate, which is essentially the functionality of the fatal error, won't work if I'm remembering correctly, but it'd be something that you'd want to verify with finance that they actually use district of residence from the October count.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good considerations, and we can take that feedback and dig a little bit deeper and find out opportunities to see if it is possible earlier in the year, or if, as Malia is suggesting, that we do still need to have that accuracy for those financial reporting coming out of the October finalizer period, in which case the goal would then be for it to come in the end of school year for July, and then also still be required out into the December on the same level, still being a non-loading error. If we find out different, we do still have some time to get your feedback and to look into that deeper to try to find out for sure. Seeing some conversation going here on the side on this. I'm not sure if it's anything that anyone would like to take verbally. If so, feel free to come off of mute and bring up your items. All right, so it sounds like we should be handling it through the chats. I can go ahead and hand off. Go ahead.
Sorry, one of the LEAs was just wanting to clarify the level 2 versus level 1 validation. I know in the past, the level 2 fatal errors were not blocking records as they were supposed to be, but we did end up fixing that. So they should actually be blocking records, but I don't know all the other implications of level 2 versus level 1, like, but as far as I understand, they would block the records.
Correct. Yeah, we do have the same pattern for level 1 and level 2 of there being a warning or it being a non-loading. So the level 2 non-loading will have the same behavior as level 1 non-loading. The separation between the levels is really just for the, again, organizing of what the data is related to. On the level 1, it's related just to your data input. And on the level 2, we start going outside of just your collection and looking out to other sources to make sure that it still holds valid and it still is good to load. Again, as I mentioned before, other LEAs, like if there's a conflict in another LEA, holding on to a student that's being claimed through one LEA, then we'll catch things there like that. Or if it's an external validation like this address, that's also the point where we reach out to any additional sources. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay, thanks. That was my question. I have never known a level 2 error to block a student from, I get a lot of calls with regards to Rise or Acadience or these other systems that are rostered through our Utrecht submissions. And it just, I was under the assumption, I've never had a level 2 error interfere with that process. So having whether or not these errors and whether or not, geographical or geolocating errors are level 1 or level 2 was of interest to me because a level 1 error will definitely block these auxiliary systems, that won't see these students like for Rise and Acadience. But I didn't think a level 2 did that. And I'm not saying that you're not changing it on your end and making it so level 2 errors are every bit as fatal as level 1 errors. But in my mind, there was a distinction there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and hopefully you brought some clarity to that. If for some reason you find what we're saying doesn't align with the results that you're seeing, please bring it to our attention, as our intent is to keep the system as accurate and close to how we believe it should behave, and also how we communicate that it's behaving. All right. I think that covers everyone, unless anyone else had anything. All right, I'll go ahead and hand off. Thank you.
Okay, hello. My name is Karen Wu. Here I'm going to talk a little bit about SOEP enrollments. Next slide, thank you. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so this is reporting tips for primary LEAs. Resources there. So if you want to know more about this SOEP program information and board rules, you can contact Dr. Corey Kempf. And if you want to talk about data issues with annual reporting, you can contact me. If you would like to know more about fiscal issues with seats data, please contact Winona Moss. Oh, by the way, these document SOEP data reporting tips for primary LEAs. I cannot have these documents ready without huge assistance from Kristen and Callista. Thank you. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just got some of the information from the document we made and put it here. So some general information. The SOEP program is available for all students in Utah, including home, private, and public school students in grades 6 to 12. Primary LEA of enrollment refers to the LEA in which an eligible student is enrolled for courses other than online courses offered through the statewide online education program. Next slide. Thank you. The primary LEA student information system must include records for both the LEA's courses and those provided by SOEP. The primary LEA can choose whether to submit the unique course or teacher information to UTREX or not. Okay. Some practice guide. Primary LEAs can help students enroll in SOEP courses, just like any other courses the LEA offers. The primary LEA will submit the SOEP course code along with the teacher ID provided by the SOEP providers. The instructional environment should be marked as OP. And the credits attempted and earned must be updated based on information provided by the SOEP provider. Okay, so I've been with this program for 1.5 years, so I'm still learning. So something I was reminded yesterday, I think probably I was reminded before. USBE uses all information from the provider courses and credits. So, yeah, so the credits attempted and earned will be updated, but it will come from the provider. So next slide, please. Alternative primary LEAs can choose to enroll all students in a generic SOEP course with a generic SOEP teacher ID to facilitate easier class registration. Enrollment in this course can be used to fill the schedule, allowing the primary LEA to accurately calculate student membership. After the student completes the course, the data can be added to the student's transcript or the student information system to populate the student's transcript. Next slide, please. Yes. Okay, some details to note. The credits attempted and credits earned fields in the generic SOEP course should be recorded as 0 in UTREX. Okay, yeah, so but because this is this comes from the LEAs, yeah, the providers will provide those credits attempted, credit earned, provide their own information. So rostering for appropriate tests can be obtained from the SOEP providers' information submitted to UTREX. The students can take tests at their primary LEA, but the SOEP provider and teacher will be accountable. The SOEP courses should complete the where taught district and where taught school fields to indicate that the course is not being taught at the primary LEA. So I just noticed that there is a question, Jonathan, what's the core code for a generic SOEP course? That's a really good question. Yeah, we just need a little bit of patience. Okay, next slide, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so here is the generic course codes and IDs. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. The student should not be removed from enrollment at the LEA until they have completed their SOEP course, unless the student chooses to exit the SOEP course or the student moves. Student who moves out of state, change LEAs, switch to homeschooling, or attend a private school should be exited from the primary LEA of enrollment. The SOEP provider should be notified by the primary LEA of enrollment. So I just capitalized this, should be notified. I think this is important. Yeah, so primary LEA need to notify SOEP provider. Students who enroll in another LEA or choose homeschooling, private education can re-enroll in the same SOEP course. Next, thank you. For students taking more than a regular schedule, student membership can be adjusted to greater than 180 if the student has the early graduation flag reported in UTREX. Next slide. Elementary school system for 6th graders. So this is a little bit more complex. Add the course using the generic course codes and generic teacher IDs to the student's schedule and submit it to UTREX. So yeah, so these refer to table 1. So that's the generic SOEP course code table. There may be a warning that the student cannot have multiple courses in an elementary model. This warning can be disregarded. Removal of this validation is planned. Once again, assessment accountability will be assigned to the SOEP provider, although the student can take tests at their primary LEAs. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so I'm done with my part.
Thanks, Carol. Are there any other questions before we move on? Let's see. Okay, it looks like that chat was about previous topic.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Krong. If there's no other questions on SOEP stuff, then we can move on to the next slide, please. Data and statistics usually every year at this time just gives a broad summary of the submission that was just finalized in October. Just for everyone's awareness, and then also to help everyone understand the timeline of how everything works. Because a lot more goes on after the finalized deadline on our end. So as you are aware, the submission deadline to finalize your October 1 data this year was on Monday, October 7th by 5 p.m. and everyone met that date. And then 2 LEAs did have to finalize after 5. But we had everyone finalized on the 7th, and then our IT teams ran the ETL, which is the process to get the data from the UTREX database into our other databases, and that was done the next day. And then our team data and statistics audits that process and the data, and we were finished with that 2 days later on the 10th. And so all processes were completed on October 11th. And then the data was available to be officially used by our finance team on the 15th. So about a week later. So at this point, all of the October 1 finalized data is available to be used, and we posted the enrollment report on our public website if anyone needed to access that. And those counts were presented to the CDC on the 15th by our finance team, and that's how the funding gets generated. And so we just wanted everyone to be aware of that, that data submission is complete. And as everyone should be aware, there were no extensions. So I'll talk about that a little later, but for those that have reached out saying they found a problem in their data, because there are no extensions this year, we would just advise you to make sure and correct those things that you didn't get submitted correctly by October 7th, to still correct them and get them correct in the December submission. All right, next slide. Okay, and I will turn the time over to Stephanie. This next few slides, we are going to just go over some common issues that we noticed specifically during this submission period that hopefully can help with the next submission and maybe LEAs that were facing these issues. So Stephanie?
Thank you, Calista. One of the main finalizing issues we've noticed is finalizing a wrong submission. For example, some LEAs intended to finalize the new data collection, but accidentally finalized the earlier one because the new data collection isn't complete collecting yet. Though this might not be a big deal if there are no fatal errors or significant updates to student records, it is always better to know what data collection, earlier one or the new one, you have finalized in order to avoid wrong submission that you didn't aware. To avoid this, please ensure the new data collection is fully completed before finalizing it. Always check the data status on your LEA dashboard. Make sure it is marked as processed in the top left corner and that the date and the timestamps reflect the new submission. Next slide, please. Another common issue is finalizing before the UTRAC's overview updates for the new data collection. This often happens close to the deadline when the system runs slower due to the high submission volume. To resolve this, we recommend working on your data and finalizing earlier. If that's not possible, you will need to be patient and wait until your submission is fully processed on the overview before finalizing. If it takes too long to update, try refreshing the page, clearing your cache, logging out, or using a different browser. Failing to do this could result in finalizing an earlier submission that might contain fatal errors that block your student records from getting into UTRACs. Next slide. Okay, now I'll turn it over to Calista.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I did already talk about this, but just to reiterate, for those that maybe forgot or didn't hear, back in April, specifically the October 1 submission deadline was adjusted because of constraints that were actually put on us to have the enrollment counts from our finance team to the CDC earlier than has ever been in the past. And so because of that, we did have to adjust the deadline, and then we compromised on that with LEAs. And the end result was that no extensions were going to be possible in the October finalized submission. And so we did communicate that out, but we still did get some LEAs asking about making adjustments to what they had finalized because they realized after the fact that there were data that were not submitted correctly. So again, please just make sure that you still fix those. While we can't adjust what you finalized in October, we still want you to fix those things so that they're correct in December and year end. And then going forward, just be extra careful for next October. Are there any questions specifically about extensions or fixing data that was submitted incorrectly? Okay, then we can go on to the next slide. And I'll turn the time over to Riley.
Hello. So some of the other issues we were found commonly were problems with the October 1 kindergarten type counts. We found that some LEAs still reported these codes incorrectly. Some were able to correct and refinalize, and then others actually ended up finalizing with incorrect counts. So as a reminder, there are 2 kindergarten type codes. Half day is NN and full day is FN. And please check that these codes are reported accurately for kindergarten students before finalizing, especially if your SAS defaults to full day. So that's what Aspire does. And we found that we were emailing a lot of LEAs on Aspire who had ended up defaulting kindergarten students that they weren't aware were defaulting to a full day. And some were able to fix it, some did not. And so these have to be accurate for the October 1 submission because there are different funding amounts for kindergarten students reported as half day versus full day. Again, if your LEA ended up finalizing incorrect data, please ensure that these get corrected before the December 1 finalization. Next slide. Okay, and then some more submission notes and lessons learned. So the October school summary report wasn't showing the or it was showing the incorrect prior year data at the start of the courtesy data reviews. The Utrecht's team was able to fix this before the finalizer was turned on. The year-end archive reports for school year 2024 are now available, and the October 1 archive reports for this school year will be available soon. And then in addition to downloading your October Utrecht's reports after you finalize, it's very useful to download a copy of your examine file at the time that you finalize. This is helpful in the event of an audit or if you find a major issue with past finalized data. And we train on this, but it's super important, again, that once you press finalize, that you go immediately download your reports because those reports are based on live data. And so if you end up doing a scheduled collection after you finalize your data and you don't download the reports, then there's a chance that the data have actually changed. And then another reminder, don't pause your submissions after finalizing in October and December. If you've paused submissions due to any major problems with your submissions, please contact Utrecht's help as soon as possible. And then otherwise, board rule requires that all LEAs submit daily updates to Utrecht. So pausing and not getting in daily submissions is not allowed. Next slide. And then just another reminder on daily submissions. So when we were preparing early in September for the October 1 submission, our team noticed that some LEAs were either not submitting daily or they hadn't set up scheduled collections. And just make sure that you end up submitting that daily since it helps us review your data and catch anything early on. It allows for a smoother submission process. And then also it's important to submit daily data because Utrecht's data are used for things like rostering. And so it's required, or it's super important that we have current and accurate data. Okay, it looks like someone has a question. Is anyone else having issues when submitting data on the weekends that you come back to a bunch of fatals? I guess if others are having issues, yes, maybe respond to Sarah so we can see if this is like a universal or more widespread issue. But otherwise, I think we can move on. Okay. Well, yeah, I guess before handing over to Tammy, if others are seeing similar issues, please put in the chat. And then if not, Sarah, I think we will try to work with we'll take a note and see if the Utrecht team has any insights into what's going on with yours. I'll hand this over to Tammy.
Thank you. I am Tammy Walker. I'm the Senior Business Analyst with the Child Nutrition Program. I'm going to be talking about reporting updates with CNP, October survey, and the summer EBT program. Next slide, please. So learning objectives for my presentation. The first one, that you can understand the data elements reported by school food service directors for the CNP October 31st survey, and also to learn which data elements are needed to prepare for the 2025 summer EBT data collections. Next slide, please. So the October 31st survey is reported every year in CNP Web. The food service director and staff have access to CNP Web where they enter their data. It is due by November 15th of every year. It is scheduled to be posted on the USBE Data and Statistics website in January. We do post that every year as well. Information is used to qualify sites for other child nutrition programs or grants. And it's basically a snapshot in time of student eligibility as of October 31st. It will include the number of students that are resident of Utah and the number of students that are non-resident of Utah. It also includes the number of students that are directly certified under certain government programs such as SNAP, Medicaid Free, Medicaid Reduced, and other qualifying programs. It will include the number of free and reduced price eligible students by grade, and also the number of minority students eligible for free, reduced price, and paid meal benefits. Okay, next slide, please. I also wanted to talk about the summer EBT program for school year 2025, which is this coming summer. The Consolidated Appropriations Act from 2023 authorized a permanent nationwide summer electronic benefit transfer, or summer EBT program. It began last summer in 2024. However, we are required to match 50% funding. So Utah State funding was approved for summer 2025. So this will be the first year we will be participating in summer EBT program. CMP, Child Nutrition Programs, and DWS, Department of Workforce Services, are working together with the LEAs to collect data for students that are eligible for summer EBT. I guess one thing I didn't include in this slide, in order for a student to be eligible for summer EBT, they have to have been enrolled in a school participating in the National School Lunch Program at some point during the school year. And they also have to be eligible for free or reduced price meals according to CMP guidelines at some point during the school year. We anticipate that we will begin collecting data on May 1st of this year for the summer 2025 issuance, and we will be collecting data weekly between May 1st through the end of August for newly eligible students. Next slide, please. So this is just a little graphic that shows there are two ways that a student can become certified as eligible for the summer EBT issuance. Anything that is not the application with DWS is considered to be streamlined certification. That's on the left side of the screen. So DWS will they have information about students that are eligible under SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, and they will automatically issue benefits to those students. For students that are compulsory school aged, which is between 6 and 18, they will be issued automatic benefits. And then we CMP will be collecting data from the LEAs that will give us information about students that are eligible for free reduced meals other than direct certification methods, and we will be providing that information to DWS. Those students will also receive benefits. And then there's a third way: the household can submit an application directly with DWS, and that is called the online summer EBT application. DWS will process those applications and check those students against LEA enrollment records from UTREX. And if they can verify that the student was enrolled in a school participating in NSLP during the school year, then the student will be issued benefits. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk a little bit about the summer EBT data sharing opt-out. Earlier this year, the board requested that we offer parents an opt-out of data sharing with DWS in case they didn't want any of their information shared between state agencies. So the Utah school year 24-25 free and reduced price meal application that is provided by CMP includes an opt-out statement. We encourage you to check with your school food service director. They do have the most recent applications that they can use, and each LEA needs the ability to track students that opt out of the summer EBT data sharing. When the adult, the parent or guardian completes the income application, the household application, they have to check the opt-out statement on page 2 if they do want to opt out of the data sharing arrangement. So they have to manually check that box if they want the opt-out. And if they do that, first of all, the LEA needs to be able to track that. And then secondly, those households will be required to apply separately with DWS if they do want to be considered for the summer EBT benefits. Next slide, please. Okay, coming soon, there will be new data elements on, I believe it's going to be the S1 record, and we will be using those for our data collection beginning in May. So one of the elements is the DWS summer EBT opt-out. You will enter yes or no, did they opt out of the data sharing? The second one is the start date of free reduced eligibility for the student, and that's for the current school year. There's going to be a rule that you do not include students that were eligible during the 30-day carryover and then drop to full pay status. So if they're eligible at the beginning of the year during the 30-day carryover, but then drop to full pay, those students are not eligible for the summer EBT benefits. There's also the end date of free reduced eligibility for the current school year. Generally, that's going to be the end of the school year, unless something happens. Something out of the ordinary happens. That's also the same business rule. Do not include the students that were eligible only during the 30-day carryover time frame. And then we're also asking for the free reduced eligibility source, and that would be the SNAP Direct Cert SNAP application, TANF Direct Cert TANF application, Medicaid Direct Cert, State Foster, FDPIR, HMR, which is Homeless Migrant Runaway, and then income application. Your school food service director will have information about all of these 4 data fields, and a lot of times they have that information in their software systems. Okay, next slide, please. So requested data elements for this summer by May 1st. These are fields that are currently in the UTREX data collector, but they are not required. However, we need them for the summer EBT in order to issue benefits. So even though you're not getting fatal errors, if we don't have this information, we can't issue a benefit to the student. One of those is the student mailing address. We ask that you include that if it is different from the physical address, because summer EBT cards are mailed to the address. And if that isn't correct, then the cards are returned to DWS and the student doesn't receive the issuance. We also need the parent and guardian first and last name. DWS can only issue summer EBT cards to a parent or guardian. They can't issue to a student. We request that you try to have, let me just finish my thought and then I'll come to this next slide. But we request that you try to collect the most recent, the most current mailing address. Best practice, we really encourage that you allow households a way to update their mailing address or parent guardian name before March or April, just so that we can have the most recent information before we start issuing the benefits. Like I said, since this is an official government document, the post office won't deliver unless the parent guardian name is registered, listed at the address. And so there's just a lot of back and forth if the mailing address is incorrect. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so talking about the CEP in Provision 2 schools, now, students that are enrolled in schools that are under community eligibility provision or Provision 2 are not automatically eligible for benefits under summer EBT. And you may remember when we participated in PEBT, the pandemic EBT a couple of years ago, At that time, students in CEP and provision schools were all automatically given the benefit. This is different. Under summer EBT, each student has to qualify individually based off of the income guidelines. And so even if they are enrolled in a CEP or provision school, they don't automatically get the benefit unless they qualify either under direct certification or they submit an application with DWS. So the free and reduced for CEP and provision schools, they don't collect the free and reduced price meal applications. And so they don't have that information. The food service director doesn't have that kind of information. And so any student that is enrolled in a CEP or provision 2 school is going to have to submit a summer EBT application from the DWS website. That's not ready yet, but we will announce that when we have the URL. And there's also a current list of schools participating in CEP and provision 2 that is posted on the USBE Data and Statistics website. I will also say your food service director knows if you have any schools under CEP or provision 2, because they have to be approved by our office before they can participate in either of those programs. And CMP is going to be hosting an online summer EBT training for LEA and school food service staff. Anyone that will be involved with summer EBT data collection and reporting. And we're going to be sending out a save the date and registration within the next couple of weeks. So just watch for that, please. And that's everything that I had, unless there are any questions. Okay, thank you.
Alrighty, so, oh, looks like we do have a question. Will this CMP information be sent to food service personnel?
Yes, we will have a training with them. And I think we're going to probably include everyone on this call as well that has anything to do with the data. We will have a specific training for everyone. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tammy. So I'm just here to provide a quick update on where the SOAR reports are, and the SOAR reports are the Student Outcome Accountability Report. So we can go to the next slide. So the expected timeline for this year, the SOAR report uses data from the October 1, 2024, school year 2025 submission, and it uses assessment data from the prior year. And we are waiting on both the cohort 2024 graduation data and the December load of ACT data to be complete, and then we will run the report. And this report's usually ready in December or January. And we are expecting this year the SOAR report to be available to LEAs via the data gateway in January. So we'll give an announcement or an update again as it gets closer. But that's it for me.
Okay, I have a couple special ed items to cover. I want to go to the first slide. So first of all, I always like to give an update about how the event dropout data turned out. It's a lot of work that we're asking you to do, digging into this in September, leading up to the October 1 deadline, and it really pays off. If you look at these numbers, anywhere between about 40 and 50% is the number of students that we drop the dropout count by each year through that work. And this year we're actually back to pre-pandemic numbers. So this was really exciting to see. So thanks everybody for your hard work on that. Okay, and then so now this item, last month I talked about the 1% alternate assessment participation cap. As I do every year, we have the justification letters that LEAs who exceed the 1% cap have to submit to USBE. And I showed last month the data for this year that we are pretty much at 1%. And so we're really concerned we're going to go over 1% next year. And so I'm back this month to talk about it again, and to give you information on what the consequences are for going over 1%. And this presentation was presented this morning in the assessment directors meeting and in the special ed directors meeting, and is also going to be presented in the Title I directors meeting. So hopefully a lot of staff at your LEA are well aware of this, and you'll collaborate on it. As you'll see, it's pretty scary. Next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, the justification letters I already covered last month in case you missed it or just need a refresher. What this means for you, data people. So if your LEA is asked to submit a justification letter, there's a good chance your special ed director is going to come to you to ask to access data and get help with analyzing. The justification letter needs to include an analysis about the students that were tested with the alternate assessment last year, but also it's supposed to include a projection of what you expect the alternate assessment participation rate to be for your LEA in the coming school year. Then if we go to the next slide, it talks about the measure, how to calculate that. So it's done. You want to do a separate calculation for each of the subject areas, language arts, math, and science. And this data is based on the EdFacts requirements for assessment data. Those particular reports are the proficiency or the performance assessment data, because the alternate assessment rate is just based off of participants. So those are students who took a test and have a valid proficiency level assigned. So for language arts and math, it's grades 3 through 10. For science, it's grades 4 through 10. The numerator is your students who took the DLM, and your denominator is your students who took DLM Rise or Utah Aspire Plus. And so you'll just need to project how many students you expect to actually take the tests this year. So that means you wouldn't include people that you expect to be opt-outs in the denominator. Okay, so, and this is our state data over time. So the announcement about this 1% cap came out in sometime in that 2017 school year. And we immediately went to work on this because in 2017, we were over, and we didn't want the very first, if possible, the very first year this new cap was in place, 2018, we didn't want to be over 1% if we could help it. And as you can see, that very first year, the work that was put in place with doing a better, working with LEAs to do a better job of making sure there aren't students identified for the alternate assessment who shouldn't be, it made a difference immediately. And it went down for a few years, and then it's been creeping back up in recent years. The second red bar in there marks where there was a change in the data that we report to EdFacts. Prior to the 2023 school year, we didn't include 9th grade students in the EdFacts data. And after starting with 2023, we do. Although when we compared with and without 9th grade, the alternate assessment rates were pretty much the same. So that didn't really impact what the percentages would have been if we had continued the practice of not including 9th grade. But then as you see in 2024, if we are pretty much right at 1% in all 3 subject areas. If you bring math out to 1 more decimal point, we're actually under 1%. But if you only bring it out to 2 decimal points, it shows us as being at 1%. So very scary indeed. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are our counts of LEAs by where the number of LEAs that are kind of at these different levels above levels of alternate assessment. And you might be wondering, why are the between 0.99 and 0.85 included in this red box? You'd think the red box is only going to be the LEAs that are over 1%. A little foreshadowing, I'm going to get to that soon, but it's about 50 some odd LEAs that were over 1% this year and are going to have to do a justification letter. The notices have already been sent out. So if your LEA has to do a justification letter, your special director should already be aware of that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the federal regulation for the 1% cap requirement. So basically, we can't test more than 1% of our assessed students using the alternate assessment. And if an LEA does have more than 1%, they have to submit that justification letter. And then USBE needs to provide oversight, which we do. We do monitoring, 1% monitoring after reviewing those justification letters. Next slide, please. Okay, and then this part of the code talks about, well, what happens if your state is anticipating exceeding the cap? So there's a waiver that states can apply for if they expect to exceed the cap. To apply for the waiver, there's a number of requirements, including that we have to tell them our plan for providing oversight to LEAs that are over 1%. And we have to provide information about how we regularly monitor and evaluate LEAs. Next slide. And then there's a requirement that we have to have assessed at least 95% of all students and 95% of children with disabilities in order to qualify to receive the waiver. And in large part, because of our opt-outs, we do not meet that requirement. So Utah cannot apply for a waiver, unfortunately. Well, we could apply. They're not going to grant it to us because we don't have this 95% participation. We don't meet this. Next slide, please. Okay, so consequences. There's going to be 4 slides, and the way it's supposed to work is it's each year. The first year of being over, your consequence 1 comes into play. But consequence 1 here says that it basically only applies if you have 95% of your students assessed. So we don't know for sure what that means for us. Are we just going to go straight into the year 2 consequence? There's a really strong possibility. The year 1 consequence, if we're able to have a year 1 consequence, if we go over 1% next year, would just mean we get notified that we have to submit a plan for compliance. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the year 2 consequence, our Title I Part A grant gets a condition put on it. And so part of that condition is we're required to submit a plan to come into compliance with the 1% cap. That's basically the same thing as year 1, but now we have this condition on our Title I grant, and it's on Title I because this isn't the Office of Special Education that's doing this. This is ESSA, so it's not IDEA funds that are the ones that would get a condition. That's why they use Title I funds. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the third consequence here is high risk status for the Title I funds. And in addition to having to have our plan for coming into compliance, we have to participate in joint OESE and OSEP monitoring calls until we meet the requirement. Next slide, please. And then the fourth consequence is that we could have Title I funding, a portion of it withheld. And that would continue until we come into compliance with the requirement. And in the meantime, until we come into compliance, we would also have to continue submitting the plan and participating in the monitoring calls. And so far, there have been a bunch of states that have reached the consequence 4, but have yet to have any funds withheld. But the thinking is that it's going to start next year. And so we'll see from other states who have been here for a while what happens with them. We're lucky that we so far have not been over the 1%, and we want to do everything we can to not go over the 1%. So the next couple of slides will go into our plan for that. So if you'll continue the next slide, please. Okay, so first let's look at the data. Okay, so why do we think we're going to go over 1%? Well, looking at our student with significant cognitive disabilities, so that's the 1% kiddos, identification rates, and this data is just based on grades 3 through 10. So because we want to see, you know, what students would actually potentially be testing in the DLM. How does this data look over time and by UTREC submission period? So as expected, the identification rates get higher as we progress through the year. Sometimes the SCRAM record just isn't updated in October with that 1% flag, or sometimes it's just the difference of students coming and going. But as of right now, our October 1% rate is 0.92, and so higher than it's been in almost a 10-year period. Next slide, please. Okay, and so this graph shows that same identification rate data as the lines, and then the bars compare it to our math alternate assessment rate. And it's just the math included here because just to kind of reduce some clutter in the graph, but math tends to be our highest alternate assessment rate. So that'll if one of them is going to go over, it's probably going to be math will go over first. So as you can see, the decreases and increases, they follow the same trend. And so based on the October 1 data going up this year, we can probably expect the math alternate assessment rates to go up this year unless we are able to make some drastic changes. Next slide, please. Okay, so and then in our December 1 rates, maybe preferable if we could right now be looking at the December 1 data because it's, you know, a little more, a little closer to the testing window, so a little better able to predict our 1% rates. But this is kind of what it shows, what is shown over time, the trend and the difference between the December identification rate and the actual math alternate assessment rate. Usually somewhere between 0.07 of a percentage point to 0.14 of a percentage point, a difference between those two rates. Next slide, please. And then, so right now we do have October data. So comparing October with the math alternate assessment rate, the difference tends to be about 0.13 to 0.17. And so, well, you can do that math, and this is why we're concerned we're going to go over 1%. Next slide, please. Okay, so the question comes up, how reliable is the 2025 October 1 data? Maybe for some reason it got reported at a higher rate this year than normal. So I pulled that data to kind of look, and I looked at student level data as well as as by the number of percent of LEAs that reported 1% data in October compared with other years and compared with year end. And so looking at kind of the range of percent of LEAs that are normally reporting 1% data in October, we're kind of in that range. We're still probably about 5 percentage points below what it'll probably be by year end this year. And so it will go up compared with what we're seeing right now. Okay, so improving our 1% rate, it's not just about the students identified as a student with the most significant cognitive disability. It's also about our denominator. If our numerator, the 1% kiddos, is going up, while at the same time our denominator, all tested students, is going down because we have more and more non-participants, then the denominator is also contributing to our 1%, our alternate assessment rate, going up and getting really close to exceeding that threshold. So this chart right here shows, just for students with disabilities, not for all students, then the major non-participation reasons in 2024. And it's pretty similar for all students. But it's parental opt-out is about half of our non-participants. But nonetheless, we do still also have a lot of our non-participants are students who were absent on the day they were expected to test, and then they just didn't get tested on another date. We have students whose reason for not testing is unknown, is our next biggest chunk. And then we have the kiddos who started their test but didn't complete enough of a code, enough of the test to get a proficiency level assigned. But our state accountability lets them still count as a participant if they complete if they have a sufficient response to be counted as a participant. There's kind of a little gray area in there where they can get a participant code even though they don't have a proficiency level. But EdFacts doesn't care. EdFacts doesn't count the student as a participant just because they have a participant code. They have to have a proficiency level assigned in order to be a participant. Okay, next slide, please. All right, and then this chart shows our opt-out data in the recent 3 years, how it has changed for language arts and for math, and then also comparing the student with disability population to the gen ed population. And so you can see it's gone up regardless of subject area or student group, although it has gone up, it has had more of an increase among students with disabilities, and it has had more of an increase in math than in language arts. So do with that information what you will. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the process timeline for our 1% data and monitoring. So the notification letters have already been sent out to the LEAs that have to submit a justification letter. The justification letter is going to be due on December 20th or by December 20th. And then something new this year is we're going to be doing 1% data dives during the months of November and December. I'll give you more info on that in just a sec. And then in January, LEAs are going to be chosen for monitoring. Next slide, please. Okay, so the LEAs that end up getting chosen for monitoring, they're going to have 4 weeks to upload files to UPIPs, and then USBE will review the IEPs and eligibility. If there's any non-compliance identified, it triggers a written finding and corrections, and then that whole process goes into effect. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the 1% data dives, so what we're going to be doing is, so we're going to have 4 different events in different regions of the state, And every LEA who assessed more than 1% of their students is going to be required to attend a data dive session. LEAs who assess between 0.85% and 1% are going to be invited and encouraged to join a session. And so at this data dive, we're going to dig into LEA, school level, and student level data to try to determine some root causes for assessing over 1% and to try to create an action plan to address those causes. And LEAs are going to be asked to bring some student files to review for the alternate assessment participation criteria. Next slide, please. So we're going to provide a big data set for every LEA. It's going to be uploaded to UPIPs, the secure document storage, probably sometime in the next week or so. And that file is going to include student level assessment participation data. That's going to include every single student who, according to the EdFacts rules, is expected to have a test, gen ed and special ed students, and it's going to include their participation status. It's going to include their reason for non-participation, their proficiency level. If they have a Scrum record, it'll include some of the details from the Scrum record, some demographic information, things like that. So that we can use that student level data to try to dig into some root causes. Then we're going to look at, it includes alternate assessment rates by LEA and school, alternate assessment rates by disability type, and also disproportionality calculations. So that's a whole nother part of the federal requirements that I haven't gone into yet. And I'll probably cover that in the next meeting. But in order to qualify for a waiver, we have to show that we are addressing disproportionality. And basically, even though we don't meet that 95% participation part, we intend to do every single other piece of this, so that if we get into 1, 2, 3 years of the consequences, we can feel good in saying that we are doing all the things, our LEAs are doing everything right. We've been working with them on this and the data is right, and we're just over 1%. And here's the reasons, but we're doing everything the way we're supposed to. And so that's why we want to be digging into all of this stuff. So the disproportionality calculations, if you want to learn more of that, we're using the calculation methodology recommended by the National Center on Education Outcomes. And this website here has a publication that explains it. And then there's a couple tools where you can plug in data, and then it spits out your status of whether you have likely disproportionality or not. So if you want to verify it for yourself, but the data set we provide is going to include all of that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is the registration information for the 1% data dive. Oh, I'm sorry, five locations, not just 4. And so if you will work with your SPED director to ensure that your LEA is registered, there's going to be a list of LEAs to come, and see if you can offer them any support. Next slide, please. Okay, so LEAs over the 1% threshold. This is in alphabetical order. This is the first slide. Go to the next slide, please. Second slide. Okay, and you'll get a copy of this. So your LEA should already know if you're over that threshold. Next slide, please. And this is the LEAs that are between 0.85%. Well, some of the slides say 0.99. It's technically between 8.5 and 1%, because it's if you're over 1% that you have to write the justification letter. So if you're at 1%, then you're in this group right here. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just a couple resources where you can find more information about this. And then I think the last slide just has Tracy Gooley's contact information. She is your guru to ask questions about this. If, I can help with data questions, so obviously. Next slide, please. Okay, and that's all. I don't see any questions in the chat. Anyone want to throw anything out there before I pass off to Calista and David? Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, this is just a short update on the graduation rate for cohort 2024. So next slide, please. So giving you an idea of the timeline, we run the final graduation rate for cohort 2024 after the October 1 data is finalized. And so the timing can vary on that year to year, depending on how the submission goes. Well, this year there were no extensions, but in past years, sometimes there's extensions. Sometimes historical updates get backlogged. And so anyways, there's no exact date that the grad rate gets run, but we are in the last stages of running it now and sort of doing our last big reviews. We tell LEAs you can expect to get the files through Move It, as well as the Data Gateway graduation preview report, will be updated again with the final grad rate data mid-November, but it will probably be even sooner than that. But just we don't want to overpromise. And so again, if you have questions on accessing that, you can reach out to myself. But we run the rate twice a year. So the preliminary rate was run after July. So basically after the year-end finalized data. And then we run it again after October. And at that point, no updates can be made unless there was some error on our part. But we're past the point of being able to make changes. But we still will give you the opportunity to review your grad rate data prior to the public release. So you can do that again in those two places. We'll place all the files and Move It. So whoever at your LEA has access to the accountability surf folder would be able to download that and share it with others. As well as there is the Data Gateway graduation preview report, which you have to have a role to be able to see that. So if you have questions on accessing it, let me know. We will send out an email though when those two things are sent out or updated. So you can expect that probably in the next few weeks. And I already talked about historical updates, possibly delaying the timeline on us running the grad rate, but I do just want to emphasize a few points as reminders. So we ask that all requests are sent in 2 weeks prior to the submission deadline. The reason for that is because, you know, we tell LEAs over and over, it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work for you because you have to go in and fill out a form and provide a lot of information. And then it's a lot of work for us because we review each request one by one. We have to do research on the request and approve or deny those based on what we find with the enrollment history. So it takes a lot of time and it's manual work. And then our IT teams are involved, so we have to submit tickets and those updates get processed manually. So the bottom line is that they just take a lot of time and effort. So any request that or update that can be done with an S1X record instead of a historical update. We just ask that you do your best to not submit those as a historical update. And if you ever are in doubt, please reach out to myself or another member of our team, and we can direct you. Yeah, you need to do a historical update or not, because then it can just save you time if it's something that you don't need to do with a historical update. And in October, this is our especially crucial period for these. We get a ton of requests. I mean, sometimes it's in the hundreds. So if you can just help us out, it also helps us be able to help you better, because then we can focus our time on answering questions about the other October 1 data points that we get asked a lot about. Yeah, please just, that might mean in order to meet that 2-week prior deadline, starting to review your grad rate data earlier. And I know the start of the school year is a busy time, but if you wait until you start doing all your October 1 enrollment stuff, when the finalizer gets turned on, at that point, we've already passed the deadline for historical updates. So we do send out that preliminary data to review in August, early August. So potentially you would have August and then most of September to review that, rather than waiting till, October 1. So that's just my plug for getting those requests in before the deadline. Any questions about the graduation rates for cohort 2024? And again, we will email out when those are officially available, but you can expect that in the next few weeks. Okay, and this last slide is just, I already talked about some of this, but where you can access the data once the grad rate is final. So I talked about the Move It files as well as the Data Gateway report. That report does require the graduation roll. So there might be some people in your LEA that don't have that roll. And so just, that's one thing, to be able to see that report on Data Gateway, you have to have. So you can contact myself if you are unable to see that. It's on the My Tools drop down. It's not in the UTREX reports. And then the final state graduation rate will be published publicly in December and sent out for press release. So we will allow you guys to see and review your grad rates prior to that happening. You should have multiple weeks before that is sent out. And then after the press release, it will be available on the USBE website. We do mask the rates. And then LEA and school grad rates will be officially available around the beginning of January. Sometimes that's earlier, depending on the timeline. And then we'll also update the Tableau dashboard. And if you have questions on how to access anything related to the graduation rate, you can reach out to myself or David, and we're always happy to help. All right, and I believe that's all I have on that. But I am the next item too. So we just wanted to have you guys start thinking about the December submission. I know we just finished with October, and there's a pretty quick turnaround before the next finalized submission happens. So we just wanted to give you some dates to keep in mind, because it does tend to come up fast after October. So next slide. So important dates to keep in mind now, because it's not that far away. The finalized deadline for the December 1 UTREX submission this year is on Monday, December 9th, and that is because the 7th falls on a weekend. So just keep in mind that that is the deadline. So please mark that as however you need to keep track of that in your phones, on your calendars. That's when all December 1 data needs to be finalized. And then the deadline for historical updates is 2 weeks prior to that. So this year that will be on Monday, November 25th. We don't tend to have a ton of historical updates in December, but if you do need to get something done prior to finalizing, it needs to be submitted by November 25th. We will have a complete training devoted to the important data points that need to be reviewed for December 1 at the next LEA data meeting. So that's another important date. Our next month's meeting will be on Thursday, November 21st, and it will be at the same time as normal, 1:30 on Zoom. And then we are planning to start the courtesy data reviews. This shows the following day, the Friday, but that's actually been changed. We're not gonna be able to start those until Monday. So it's actually the week of Thanksgiving. So I know a lot of people will be out, but please just, when you get back in the office, if your courtesy data review came and you were out on, leave, make sure to pay attention to your emails because we are planning to send those out. For the most part, they will all be sent out in those few days before Thanksgiving. And every LEA will receive one. So please make sure that you pay attention to emails around the time of Thanksgiving. And then the finalizer will be turned on that following Monday, which is December 2nd, and it will be available for an entire week through the 9th. Any questions about the December submission? We will talk specifically about data points at the next training meeting. But this is just to get you thinking about dates. All right, I believe that's all I have for that item. Okay, and that's actually the end of our meeting. So we'll stay on for a bit if anyone has any last questions or comments. But otherwise, that is all we have. And thanks for attending. Oh, yeah.
I had a question about just submissions in general. I don't know if other people have had these issues, but just this week I started getting fatal errors on high school completion status. Statuses that were set. Are you aware of this problem?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. We did have a couple districts reach out. That if it's the validation that I'm thinking of, that is a mistake on our part. And I believe the work was done to turn that off. At this point, Cliff might be able to verify that or revert back. There were some updates made on a specific validation related to the completion statuses and something went wrong. And so thank you, Riley. It was the S1.362. So if that's the one you're talking about, Logan, yes, that is not correct and that should be reverted back. So you should not be having those errors.
Yes, I believe that's the one I was talking about. So one thing I did, the majority of my errors came from post-high students that were marked as retained. The active students, I went in and removed the high school completion status as retained, which I don't think, where they're still active students, I don't think that that's an issue, or is it something that I need to go find them all and mark that again as retained?
No, there's nothing you need to do. We would have to look at your specific students, but for the most part, those errors were triggering incorrectly. So you shouldn't have been getting those errors.
Okay.
So you need to fix anything. That an update was done on that validation and something went wrong. And so the UTREX team reverted back And I believe that that is already in place, so if you've resubmitted.
Yes.
Okay.
No one has this error right now.
I'm still getting some, but it's because it's on the ones that I did S1X records on. I tried going in and removing the high school completion status to see if that would make the error go away. So on all my S1Xs, I've got to go back in and figure out what their what their high school completion status was, so I can put it back in there, I guess, because those are ones I'm still getting the error on.
If
But
those
it's
were, if those were S1X records that you needed as part of your October submission, you don't need to keep submitting them. If
okay.
if they were in the October finalized data, then that means that the update has already been made. So you can just stop submitting them if you want. That's another option.
Well, I'm still getting errors on them though, so I need to do something to
So the
fix those.
validation
So
is only supposed to trigger on students who have an exit code of 11 or students who have a graduation code and are in grade 9, 10, or 11.
yeah, these are all post-high kids that chose not to return.
Yeah, it shouldn't have been triggering on them.
Yeah, those are errors I still have
Mm.
present. So
I wonder, this might be a different, so I don't see any 362s on yours, but maybe is this something that you can email us about, since it
okay.
seems to not be related to the one that
Well,
was reverted?
I know Michelle Huff in Washington was having similar issues because we
Yeah,
discussed
Oh.
them together.
Yeah, please include me in that email as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the ones that we were aware of that were triggering incorrectly were the S1.362. And so if you've resubmitted, that problem should have gone away. But maybe if you did something to fix those, it created a new problem.
It is. They're S13356 and 363 now. But it's because I'm sure it's because the resident status is still set as X and there's no high school completion status. So I'll go in and just try and fix them. So
Well, we updated I think 2, maybe 3 validations. The S1361, the S1362, I know for sure were updated. And as far as I could tell, there weren't any problems with the S1361. It was just the S1362. But if there's another one that just suddenly started behaving differently and you think it's not behaving correctly, please send it my way and I'll look into it, because it's possible that we had another validation updated and it just isn't working correctly.
well, I'll go back in and try and put high school completion statuses on all these. If errors show up again tomorrow, then I'll email you. But if you don't hear from me, then just know that must have fixed it. So
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Logan. Are there any other questions from any other LEAs or comments? All right, well, we can go ahead and end, and we will, as always, email out the slides, meeting notes, and recording in the next week. So thank you, everybody.